During the 2008 economic recession, over 8.7 million jobs were lost in America. The median home price dropped by about 30%, and 2.9 million homes were foreclosed on in 2010. The recession was like a storm that hit out of nowhere. One minute, there were blue skies and a booming housing market, and the next, major financial institutions came crashing down. The housing bubble burst, and the global economy was thrown into chaos. For most people, significant economic events like this typically come as a shock because they haven't ever occurred in our lifetimes. However, for Ray Dalio, renowned founder of Bridgewater Associates and one of the most influential financial figures, these events do not always hold the same level of surprise. In a recent interview, Dalio established that significant events often follow historical patterns. These happenings occur repeatedly throughout history, but not always repeatedly in one generation. However, according to the investor, his knowledge of these recurring patterns has been instrumental in guiding his career and shaping his approach to understanding the economy and financial markets. He emphasized that because these shocking events have actually occurred multiple times throughout history, those like him who've done the research, that is, the work of digging through records to identify the significant patterns, can anticipate coming disruptions. In the same way, a meteorologist uses weather data and patterns from the past to predict upcoming storms, Dalio was able to use historical economic data and patterns going as far back as 500 years to anticipate the 2008 financial crisis. He highlighted the similarities between the dynamics leading up to the Great Depression and those preceding the 2008 crisis. The investor's latest warning revolves around the possibility that the U.S. might be losing its place as top dog. Dalio argues that the United States is in relative decline based on several key indicators. According to him, there are three big things that characterize major disruptions in the financial sphere. First, debt pointed out the high levels of debt in the economy and the vast amounts of money being printed today by central banks, in particular the U.S. Federal Reserve. Churning out currency in such large quantities is a strategy aimed at increasing the money supply to the end, so that economic activity increases and the nation can avoid a recession. He outlined similarities between the present situation and the period between 1930 and 1945, which also featured a lot of debt. Countries turned to money printing to fight economic problems and try to grow their economies. However, he went on to describe the Fed's strategy of creating and then withdrawing money and credit as a cycle that leads to economic booms and busts. By making money cheap and readily available, the Fed stimulates spending and economic growth in the short term. However, this approach also creates large amounts of debt that eventually need to be repaid, leading to economic downturns. It's a move that only brings relief in the short term. The country gets to steer clear of an instant crisis, but the long-term risks aren't something to trifle with. It's like a balloon being inflated. When you blow air into it steadily, the balloon gradually expands, representing economic growth. However, if you keep blowing air into it too quickly, the balloon might burst, causing disruption and chaos. The balloon represents the economy, and the air being blown into it is like the money being printed by central banks, such as the U.S. Federal Reserve. When central banks print money excessively, inflate the balloon too quickly, it can lead to high levels of debt and financial instability, the risk of the balloon bursting. The second big thing, Dalio pointed out, is the rise of internal conflicts. He talked about the recent rise in disagreement and tension among people within a country, particularly in matters related to politics and wealth distribution. This heightened tension isn't a far cry from the societal unrest witnessed in the early 20th century. Back then, the fast-paced industrialization led to vast inequalities between the wealthy elite and the working class. This gave birth to discontent among large segments of the population, and this often spilled over into protests, strikes, and sometimes violent clashes between different social groups. At the same time, radical ideologies were quickly gaining traction, from communism and socialism to fascism and nationalism. These ideologies were fuel to fire for political polarization. A recent study found that 92% of Republicans and Democrats believe the other party is a very or somewhat serious threat to the country's well-being. In addition to economic and political factors, societal norms and values were also undergoing significant transformations. Traditional beliefs and customs were challenged by new ideas and movements, such as women's suffrage, civil rights, and labor rights activism. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of these historical trends. Dalio pointed out a surge in populism, where leaders gain support by promising radical changes to address people's concerns. This rise in populism often intensifies the existing political polarization, where opposing sides hold strongly contrasting views and ideologies. Also, social movements advocating for racial justice, gender equality, and environmental sustainability have grown more prevalent. A clear example is the Black Lives Matter movement, which about 80% or more of Black adults have expressed support for every year since it started in 2020. These internal conflicts are not solely ideological, they are deeply intertwined with economic disparities that have been widening over time. The increasingly massive gap between the rich and the poor in many countries and unequal distribution of resources fuel resentment and frustration among different segments of the population. Dalio warns that if these underlying issues are not addressed, the internal conflicts could escalate into widespread upheaval, mirroring historical periods of turmoil. It is essential for societies to find constructive ways to address these divisions and work towards greater social cohesion and economic fairness to mitigate the risks of internal conflict. It's like a tug of war between various factions of society, whether the left versus the right or the rich versus the poor. As the socio-economic differences and/or disagreements deepen, the rope becomes stretched tighter, symbolizing the increasing tension between the two groups. The third major concern Dalio highlighted revolves around the escalating tensions on the international stage. He drew parallels with a significant shift in global power dynamics that occurred from 1930 to 1945, ultimately leading to World War II and the emergence of the United States as the dominant global power. While the US was once the uncontested global leader, accounting for half of the world's GDP post-World War II, its position has been steadily eroding. Dalio points to China as the primary challenger, noting its extraordinary economic growth and increasing influence on the world stage. Since Dalio first visited China in 1984, its per capita income has increased 26-fold, underscoring its rapid development. This shift in power dynamics is a critical factor in Dalio's assessment of the future. This competition extends beyond just economic realms to encompass technological advancements and military capabilities as well. According to historical patterns, such power transitions often spark tensions and conflicts, potentially resulting in widespread geopolitical instability. In addition to these three man-made issues, Dalio points out two natural forces that have historically had profound impacts on civilizations: natural disasters and pandemics. Dalio notes that throughout history, acts of nature like droughts, floods, and pandemics have toppled more civilizations and caused more deaths than wars and economic crises combined. The recent COVID-19 pandemic is a stark reminder of how such events can effectively put a stop to large-scale and even day-to-day operations on a global level. During the Spanish flu, economies around the world were severely disrupted. Labor shortages due to illness and death, coupled with efforts to contain the virus, led to significant economic slowdowns. For example, many industries, including manufacturing and agriculture, faced severe declines in productivity. The COVID-19 pandemic caused similar disruptions. In the US, GDP saw a sharp decline, particularly in the second quarter of 2020, with a record drop of 9.1%. Employment was drastically affected, with 20.5 million jobs lost in April 2020 alone. However, Dalio also highlighted the remarkable adaptability and inventiveness of humans. He is optimistic about the current era's capacity for technological innovation, which he believes can help mitigate some of the challenges we face. This adaptability has always been a crucial factor in overcoming crises. According to the businessman, it could be a central tool for as the human race navigates the coming turbulent times. For Ray Dalio, the way to get through these challenging times is by sticking to basic economic principles. Essentially, the nation ensures to manage its budget wisely, invest in good education, and ensure that society works together harmoniously. A balanced budget means the government should not spend more than it earns, which helps keep the economy stable. Good education prepares people for better jobs and a stronger economy. A cohesive society means people need to work together and support each other, which helps create a stable and prosperous environment. It's like eating a balanced diet. Just as eating the right amount of food keeps the body healthy, spending within means keeps the economy strong and prevents financial crises. Overeating leads to health issues, while undereating causes malnutrition. Dalio also gave advice about evaluating where to invest. His thoughts? Look for countries that earn more than they spend, have strong balance sheets, and exhibit social cohesion. He believes that these factors are crucial for sustaining economic health and resilience in the face of global challenges. In an environment where currencies are depreciating, Dalio advises looking for assets that can retain value. Traditional stores of wealth, like money and debt instruments, are becoming less reliable due to low interest rates and high inflation. Instead, he suggests investing in tangible assets such as real estate, education, and essential goods. He also emphasizes the importance of diversification. By spreading investments across different assets and regions, investors can reduce their risk and increase their chances of weathering economic storms. The investor cautioned against overexposure to any single investment, noting that it only takes one significant loss to knock an investor out of the game.